Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Aaron Murtis, and I am the clinical coordinator of the internship fieldwork process here at Montana State University in Billings, which there's our logo. I'm just going to hide it for most of the time. Before we get going on this, I want to explain a few things. First of all, you may notice that this says Part 2 up here on the screen. That's because as part of our program, our accreditation requires that we do two things. One, not only talk about supervision models, which we're going to do that in a little bit, but also orient people to how our fieldwork process works. So that part one of this training is specific to internships on our campus. So most of you probably won't need to care about that. But if you're wondering why it's Part 2 and what Part 1 is, that's why. The other thing is, the way that I approach this kind of stuff is I'm going to talk about a very theoretical model for how supervision, the development of a student through supervision works. But in both my classes and in trainings and in life, I'm not really one to appreciate this highly abstract kind of theory stuff. What I want for us today is to say, how do we apply it to your life and to your real interns that are coming to you in really a practical way. The one caveat to that is that it's going to be kind of like an overview of student development into a full-blown professional, fully certified, fully licensed, whatever it is, a full-blown professional counselor. That's really the whole idea here. So while you may be watching this and saying it doesn't really apply to my specific situation or my specific job site or whatever, hopefully you can see as I begin talking about it that it's about the student and their walk through the educational process and then through the fieldwork process and then out into the professional world too, and potentially beyond. So that's going to be kind of the focus of this today. Let me jump ahead just a little bit here. The training is in two parts. I already mentioned that we're going to skip over the first one, so we'll kind of skip down to this next line here. The big thing is we want to understand why supervision is different than clinical work or managerial oversight. Some of you may be supervisors of staff. You may have kind of moved up a ladder to get to another place where you're managing your counselors' workloads and kind of how they're performing on the job. Those kind of like performance indicators are a little bit different than what we're going to be talking about today. There may be some crossover, and there likely will be, but the whole reason why this kind of stuff is required by accreditation is because the field at large has given that input to accrediting bodies and said, hey, this supervision stuff is sort of different than just being a manager and just making sure people are following their job requirements and that kind of stuff. So hopefully that'll become clear in a little bit here. We get a lot of pushback on people who have said, I've been in the field for 20 years. Why would I not be able to do this? And the reason is because telling other people how to perform certain tasks is a little bit different than knowing where they are at in the process and anticipating what things might be challenging for them and what things aren't. And even after hearing that, you might be like, yeah, I know how to do that. And in that case, I say, okay, good. Then you can call me up or email me and say, hey, this is how you're getting it wrong. And I'm happy to hear that kind of stuff. For those of you that may get a few nuggets of information out of this that are helpful, that's great. Whatever is your perspective, I'm happy to hear it. And if this is just something you're doing to check a box, check the box, you do you. Otherwise, hopefully you'll be able to pull something out of this. And as I've mentioned, this is about counseling student development. So let's just jump into what this means. The title of the model that we're learning from here is IDM Supervision, which stands for Integrated Developmental Model. It's one of those really academic kind of phrases for saying how counselors come in from having their own personal background, going through our educational program, learning a bunch of stuff from a textbook, and then actually getting out with real clients and saying, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, I'm not sure that I'm ready for this kind of responsibility, whatever. And that is a developmental process because eventually people get comfortable and eventually they learn their roles. But there's always this sort of, maybe it's a little dramatic to say this, but I think eternal process of learning and growing and developing even more into the kind of person that can sit with any other kind of person, hopefully, and be able to help them with something and be kind of walk through the process of counseling with them. So that's kind of the idea here. The general stuff about IDM supervision is that when students come in, oftentimes they have this very simple mechanistic way of demonstrating interventions. In our group classes, they say, okay, here's a worksheet, and here's the process of getting everybody to perform the worksheet. And then they say, okay, I've got to make sure to have my active listening down, and I have to make sure to respond with summarizations and paraphrases and all those kind of really technical things. And their conscious mind is full of those things. Be aware of how you're sitting. Be aware of what your facial expressions are, that kind of stuff. And then there's this other part of the developmental process that we say, let's try and grow your ability to be vulnerable and make deep and meaningful connections with clients. So in training, we're doing a little bit of both, or at least hopefully we're doing a little bit of both, saying we not only want you to have a competent skill level, but we also want you to be prepared at a personal level to handle the kind of relationships that you're going to be asked to handle. Because there's a lot of talk around here about, at least in the school that I'm in, a lot of talk about boundaries and, working harder than your clients and that kind of stuff. So we're going to kind of navigate this mechanical rote reproduction of skill content or something like that versus how is a person's developmental, characterological kind of maturity level, you might say. That's kind of language that I like to use, but we'll see if I continue using it throughout this training or not. The other thing, too, is that when we talk about supervision and helping kind of nurture students through the process of their own characterological development and all that kind of stuff, the ethical question of, are we actually doing counseling with our students in terms of helping them grow? Or are we just here to teach skills and their own personal growth is kind of their own responsibility? I walk a thin line between saying I am more than happy to support students as they go through our process and to help them identify the things that are like barriers for them that keep them from being able to make those deep and meaningful connections, because the counseling portion of rehab counseling is about the relationship building and the networking and all that kind of stuff too. So if you're feeling that the ethical, I don't know what the right word is exactly, but if you're feeling like it's ethically uncomfortable to be in this space talking about these kind of things, that's perfectly fine. Hopefully this model will give you some more insight into what things are appropriate for teachers to do, but also as a faculty supervisor, I kind of put one hat on and take off the other sometimes. But as supervisors for you, how much are you there for and what are your responsibilities and that kind of stuff too. So hopefully that'll get a little bit more clear. This comment about high road versus low road information processing, this is really just one of those like technical scientific kind of comments about when people, and here's the analogy that I use to explain it, so I'll circle back to this comment in a second. But when people start learning a new sport, something like that, they are thinking of, like, we'll just take football, for example. I don't really know football. My wife knows football. So if you're looking at me and you're like, that's not how the game works, then sorry. It's just kind of, I'm too much nerd, I guess, for my own good. But in football, players learn the positions on the field, they learn the rules of the game, they learn specific plays to their team, and they perform those plays. They stand in a certain spot, run a certain route, whatever it is. But the thing that makes a person catch a ball or run with a ball or dodge a play or whatever, it's kind of this like gut intuition, the stuff that gets buried in their muscle memory and in their field sense and that kind of stuff. And that's very similar to the counseling process, that there is this the very cerebral kind of executive functions where we have to think about what we're doing and what we're saying with clients and be very intentional about learning the ethics. But then over time, as a person progresses and gets further along in their, experience level, they get this sense of like, that would be a thing to be concerned about ethically. Or I just kind of sense that the thing that this person needed was for me to ask this kind of question or to listen a little bit more or something like that. So in terms of high road processing, that's the stuff that ends up in our conscious awareness. It's a lot slower than our low road, which is sort of our emotional memory and the way our nervous system responds to our body and to clients and that kind of thing. When it comes to making relationships, that low road stuff happens faster and it creates these reactions within us. Like, for our purposes today, students get anxious and they get nervous about this stuff and they start thinking about it in their conscious mind. And so what we're ultimately going for is, how do we then train the muscle memory of a counselor to just sort of automatically react in a way that's safe and effective and helpful for clients, so that they can focus their conscious mind on other things. That's kind of what this is all about. In short, it's about building counselor intuition in a way that's safe and productive. That's kind of the idea. When we go through the various steps of the models, we're also thinking about what we pay attention to. And after my previous comments about this high road, low road stuff, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. We pay attention to clients in sessions, but initially, a lot of counselors really are doing a lot more paying attention to themselves. What am I doing? How am I looking? What am I saying? What's my next comment? That kind of stuff. And so what we're trying to do is shift a little bit of this self-other awareness off of self to others, help build a little bit of autonomy in a counselor so they're not constantly asking supervisors, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? That kind of stuff, which we don't always hear those questions, and you probably can, you have your own experience there too. But I get a lot of students who come in and say, oh, Professor Murtis, the highly esteemed professor, you have a PhD, you must be so important. And at first, I kind of let them believe it. I'm like, yeah, there's probably some things that I can share with you that you don't know that are maybe helpful. But by the end of the program, my hope is they look at me and they say, oh, yeah, you're fine, but I know stuff too. And now I have to go perform it. And we're colleagues here, and we're essentially equals on any kind of like power hierarchy, which means that I'll be looking to the students in the future to be supervisors and inform me about what's going on in the field. So this idea of autonomy is that we're building autonomous or independent or professional counselors who have their own expertise and that kind of thing and don't constantly rely on supervision for help. It's not the same as having a good network of people to help you with hard things, but those are peers. That's what peers are for. So, and then here's a whole bunch of basically just words. So what we specifically want to pay attention to is these things: skill, competence. We have evaluation and assessment measures to measure that skill stuff. We want to look at assessment technique, both how they're performing assessments and also how they're looking at clients and really reading the right cues, that kind of stuff, which is a little bit less formal, not something you necessarily write down on a piece of paper, but something that gives you that intuition of like, oh, this is happening, something that they're not seeing, but I get to see based on my training, something like that. Client conceptualization. We want to pay attention to how the student understands the client and all of the biopsychosocial nuances, from their psychology to their biology, their medical conditions, their disabilities in many cases, and their social life as well. I mean, it's a sort of a big package, and it's a big thing to look at. But that's what we're trying to get, is how much of a scope does the student understand about this condition, with all the various political and personal things that are attached to what kind of services a person is seeking. Of course, as always, individual differences and diversity and multicultural considerations, those are important too. Students need to be able to see those, as do we. Theoretical orientation, treatment planning, ethics, etc. Those are all parts of what we get to pay attention to as supervisors and trainers and that kind of stuff. So we'll be talking about those things. Some of these we've already mentioned too a little bit, but what supervisors look for. And this is where we start to get into the territory of how is this actually different than being a manager. As a manager, you're considering a whole bunch of things. Some of these are probably going to be a part of it, but other things that clinical supervisors or training supervisors may not have to care about. So what we're looking for here is we're really looking for that self-other awareness. How much time is a person spending thinking about, am I doing it right? What are the things I need to say? I feel nervous and it's blocking out my potential to really absorb a lot of what's going on around me. There's that kind of stuff. Motivation, of course, stages of change. Where is a student at? Do they even recognize what they're needing to be working on? Or do they have little insight into what their own barriers are in terms of their own development? We can talk about that in a little bit here once we get to that part. And then autonomy, I think I've covered that in more detail. This is, I don't know why I have this on as a second slide, but there it is. That's exactly what I just showed you. So we'll just skip past that one too. Okay, this is where we really get into the nuances of this model and how this stuff actually works. So I'm going to kind of walk you through just a little bit more of what I've already kind of explained in brevity. When a student comes into a program, they often have a very high view of their professors and a low view of themselves. It's not always the case, but sometimes. Some students come in and say, I need to get a license, I need a piece of paper, I need a certification. I don't know what you have to offer because I've been doing this for so many years. And so there's that kind of arrogant view, which is a barrier in and of itself, and we'll discuss that too. But more often, students come in saying, I want to learn, I'm really excited about this. They have a high motivation to see clients and change the world and be really idealistic about what they can do as a person. At the same time, that excitement is also, they get a little bit more anxious too. It's usually, in my experience anyway, it's usually about 4 to 5 weeks of their first semester when they're like, oh my gosh, there's so much work and now I'm stressed out and this is going to get real fast. And they have to continue that for 2 years or whatever it is. So the motivation to want to do, to change the world, do a whole bunch of wonderful things really peaks at the very beginning. And then it kind of wanes off through the first semester. And then they're kind of in the long road for that textbook knowledge. By the time they get to you, and when this stuff starts to really become relevant, there's oftentimes this sense of like, oh my gosh, I did not know that counseling involved this many things, and I have to be attentive to this many kinds of people and these kinds of issues, and that those sort of things are going on in students' heads. And what that means is that it sort of decreases the motivation. There's still oftentimes a lot of like desire to get into it and get out with people and be with real clients and that kind of stuff. But there's also a lot more anxiety that is a barrier to a person's ability to really connect with those people. So what ultimately we want to do is see if we as supervisors and trainers is reduce the anxiety, increase the motivation. And that's kind of what at least I focus on during the fieldwork process is how ready is this student to jump in and just take initiative and learn? How much do they understand about their own barriers and where they're at developmentally? And how much are they looking for help? How much do they accept feedback and really take it into consideration, that kind of stuff? So in this first box over here, I can't reach all the way over there because my green screen runs out, but where just to the right of where it says level 1. Level 1, people come in with high motivation. However, at that point, they're dependent on their faculty and on you as a supervisor, and they need that structure. So one of the things you can be looking for in your supervisees is how much are they ready to jump in and start doing the work, and how much are they applying the knowledge that they use in a program versus how much are they looking to you for, okay, I need you to tell me what I'm doing wrong, or I need you to tell me how this client should be understood, or I need you to explain something about them. So you can use your judgment in terms of where they are in that process. Now, just because they think they don't need structure and they feel independent with their abilities does not necessarily mean they are. Because as I just mentioned, there are those people who are really, really confident, like, I can do this. And they're kind of almost bravado about it. Like, I've been in the field, I know what I'm doing. I can handle myself and I don't need to learn from anybody else. By the way, wink, wink, faculty can get this way. We can be egotistical about how smart we are and how much we know to the point where it becomes a barrier for our own learning. Do we actually listen to clients? Do we actually listen to supervisors in the field and our colleagues in kind of a scholarly way? Are we actually accepting input and feedback in a way that helps us become better? If not, we all know what that looks like. It's some sort of egotistical professor who doesn't have time for anybody else, right? Because they're just better than everyone. That's a problem with professors, with supervisors as well. If you're looking at this thinking, what do I need? I don't need this stuff. I've been doing this. I got it. I'm smart. I'm capable, all that kind of stuff. Yes, but there's always more to learn. And so the idea is a person independent, but also seeks out that future learning and that future feedback? In the level 1 here, if a student is not doing that, that becomes more of a barrier to their growth in terms of learning about clients, their supervisors, their sites, their states, their country, all that kind of stuff. So something to consider how you're understanding the students. In terms of what cognitively is going on in their minds, there's this self-focus we've already talked about, but that self-focus is limited self-awareness. In other words, they have this affective performance anxiety. What that means is, I've kind of already described this, but what that means is they focus highly on themselves, but not necessarily on the things that would provide more insight into what they can do with their clients. It's more often like, what am I doing wrong? How can I improve? I really want to get this better, but I don't. Their mind is consumed with what's going on with them, but not necessarily on how their client might be perceiving them and how they can build trust in the context of not just their client, but with their colleagues, and then kind of build a reputation around them within their community too. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Usually, by the time people get to practicum or internship, usually they're kind of moving beyond this stage. Not always, but oftentimes they're like, okay, I'm ready to see clients, and I'm feeling kind of confident. I'm nervous, I'm anxious, but I'm also really excited. And they kind of get to this level 2 stage. And level 2, when we talk about a person's motivations, all of a sudden they're not just motivated to improve their professional status and get some degree and make themselves look really good and feel really good about graduating. All those things are important, but they kind of fluctuate back and forth between, I'm confident and I believe I can do this, and I'm not sure if I'm really cut out for this, or I'm not sure if I can really handle all of the responsibility. Some of that, especially when it comes to workload, that's to be expected. We in the rehab counseling world, we know something about the concept of work hardening, that it's one thing to be smart, and it's another thing to be continually smart throughout the entire day after having seen 5 to 10 clients or whatever. You're doing all this work and you're getting exhausted. There's just a certain amount of, what's the right word? I'm blanking on the word right now, but it starts with a P. I'm not going to get it. But there's a certain amount of being ready for a full day's work and the emotional capacity to handle all of the stressful things you're going to deal with clients. And so in level 2 here, we're talking about students who fluctuate back and forth between that kind of confidence. In terms of being independent and autonomous, I think of level 2 as kind of like the teenage years. It's kind of like where a kid still wants their parents to give them the car keys. They're not ready to pay insurance yet, and they're not ready to really manage paying for upkeep and maintenance. But they want all the independence, but are not necessarily ready for all the responsibility. So we're kind of navigating between an assertive student who's like, okay, I know what I want, I know what I need to be doing now. I know the tasks of the job after they kind of go through that initial training period on the job at the site. But they still feel like they're sort of compliant with somebody else and need that other person to help them, like a supervisor would. So when I think of it in my head anyway, in terms of like a teenager's development, they want all the freedoms, but they're not wanting all the responsibilities, or at least not really internalizing what those responsibilities mean for their own choices and what they're capable of doing. So level 2 means they're sort of leaving the nest, to use an analogy, but they still need to keep one foot in because they're not fully ready to go. What this means in terms of what's going on in their head is that they start to focus a little bit more on the client. They say, okay, my anxiety level is going down. I'm now comfortable with the process of giving informed consent or looking over medical records, or I'm comfortable with my role. And now I can start focusing more on them and really understanding more of the nuances of what's going on with the client, but they might have limited awareness of what all that means. In other words, understanding perspective of what's going on in that client's world in this bigger scale, what's happening within their community, what's happening within the client's psychological readiness to be engaging in work readiness or something like that. It shifts to the client, but that perspective on their life is still a little bit limited. In terms of their affect or their, what they look like when they show up to work, this means that they can stop focusing so much on themselves and empathizing with clients and really sort of getting in, to use the analogy, is getting in the shoes of another person and really being in that space with them to understand their perspective. The challenge with that, though, is that while that empathy is an important thing, at stage 2, there's this risk of over-identifying. And what this looks like in my practicum classes is that a student will come in and say, oh, this person has such a hard life, and I really want to advocate for them, and I want to help them get everything they need, and I want to make sure that they have the best chance at getting a job or recovering from a certain thing or whatever the issue is. However, that means that there's this like enmeshment or lack of boundaries, because they can over-identify with clients, and not only then that kind of counter-transference stuff that we learn about, they can identify with the struggle, sometimes get overwhelmed, sometimes get overburdened, and sometimes they can say, I want this more than my client does. So we have lots of conversations about boundaries, and like, yes, you're doing a good job empathizing and really with them in this process, and you're helping them navigate their benefit systems, and you're helping them navigate family issues or whatever. But are you spreading your workload evenly across people in ways that are appropriate and necessary? It doesn't mean everybody gets 10 minutes. It means that you remain healthy and you remain in a good place so that you can help all these different people within what they need, and also have capacity to handle emergencies when they happen, right? It's not uncommon for clients to not show up for a while and then all of a sudden show up and be like, hey, guess what? I'm going to drop this huge thing in your lap and let you help me with it. And that's where it can be really helpful for a client to say, I can empathize with you, but I also have some boundaries that I have to express and let you know, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do. But all the while, wouldn't it be great if we could do that in a way that still maintains relationship with clients and also tells them, I care about you, you're important to me, and here's what I can do to help you, without them leaving feeling, oh, they don't have time for me, they don't want to help me, that kind of stuff. That's kind of what we're really shooting for here, is remember that stuff about growth and characterological development? It's one thing to say, I have boundaries. I can only allow 10 minutes for this conversation, or I'm not going to do that. That's a whole lot different thing than saying, with the time that I have today, I really want to help you with as much as I can, but this issue is going to take a little bit longer, and we're going to need to do that some other time. So I'm going to need you to come back if you can. Those two things, it says the same message, but it says it in a very different way. And so this is where we're expanding on a person's ability to empathize without losing themselves and their need for boundaries in the process. Now, how am I doing on time? 27 minutes, perfect. This is about the point where students, we kind of expect them in the academic world, we kind of expect them to get up to level 2. But not all students really make it to level 3. And what we'll talk about, this 3I, I don't really know why they have 3I. Why don't they just say 4? I've read through the book and I still don't understand why don't they just say level 4. But whatever. It does make a little bit of sense if you dig into the details. We're not going to go there. But one of the things people say, or the authors of this model, is that not everybody makes it to level 3I or level 4 for practical purposes. Some people just never get to that place of being fully autonomous. Some people need more direction. Some people need more guidance, which, as the supervisor in not a practical fieldwork supervisor, but if you hold a supervisory role in your agency, this is where that stuff comes in. This is where, if people aren't ready to make those decisions for themselves and can't necessarily be trusted to carry themselves in this fully ethical and appropriate way, then supervisors sort of manage some of that too. So you may be seeing some of that as well. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So let's go back to level 3. In level 3, in terms of motivations, remember we're coming out of this like, I'm super motivated, highly idealistic, and then I get to the field work and I'm not so much. I'm really nervous, I'm really scared. And then level 2, they start to pick up like, I really feel confident about certain situations or certain kinds of people, but these other people, I don't understand this, or I'm not confident in these situations. But in level 3, a person is really kind of stabilized. And like I said before, we don't expect everybody to get there. So oftentimes that kind of level 3 stuff comes out after they leave our training program. Occasionally there's somebody who gets it here. There's like every semester it happens, but it's not always. What this looks like is that we've heard of the term imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome says, I'm doing all the things, but internally I don't necessarily believe that I deserve it, or that I'm good at it, or that I'm capable of doing certain tasks or whatever. So that imposter syndrome, it's still present and it can still happen, but it's not immobilizing. It's not to the point where because I don't believe it, I can't do it, and now I have to go ask for help. It's kind of like, I can still see this client, I can still perform this task. I'm nervous about it, but that's okay. I can still go through it and manage that anxiety that I have. That means that even though you might have interns or even staff at your agencies, you might have somebody there who's like, I'm not 100% confident about myself, and I don't feel like the world is all kinds of rosy everywhere, but I'm still willing to stay in the struggle and keep working towards doing these things. And that's both tasks on the job, and it's also the internal stuff. It's like, I know that one of my barriers is, I don't know what it might be, but one of my barriers is that I don't give clients enough resources, or I'm not comfortable with this cultural background or ethnic identity, something like that. But they can still say, but I'm going to go in curiously and try and learn and try and build my capacity to provide resources or to understand a certain kind of person that I'm not comfortable with, something like that. So when I say stable, I mean they can be trusted to take on these tasks and think appropriately through difficult situations. Doesn't mean they're perfect and they are all kinds of confident and they're super motivated and they're outgoing and all that kind of stuff. We all know those extroverts. I'm kind of an extrovert, so I get this one. This one's important to me. But as extroverts, you can have those people who are willing to go out and do these things and try new tasks and take risks and all that kind of stuff. But we're not really talking about that here. We're talking about somebody who not only can do those things and have motivation outwardly and show that they're willing to take on new projects and all that kind of stuff, but motivation to really engage in connection, engage in the process of being with clients. And that's a whole different kind of vulnerability than just saying, I'll take on a new task because I know I can handle it. It's, I can go into this other person's space and whatever they tell me, I think I can handle their reality, but also help them walk out of it without my stuff getting in the way. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's more of that internal process. So in the next column over, when we're talking about that process of becoming more independent and autonomous, this is really where a person is almost entirely independent, but yet there's certain things that, when this ethical situation comes up, I've never encountered this, and I'd really like to reach out to some of my supports to talk through what this means. What am I missing? What do I need to be considering that I'm not? How does this work within our organizational policies or something like that? So that conditional dependency is something that is an absolutely normal and I would say maybe even required part of the process that most of us should have people around us that we can consult with. We should have people that we go to when we're having stressed out days so that it doesn't come out in other unhealthy ways. But we can mostly handle ourselves in most situations. When I think about the level 3 person, I kind of imagine somebody who is probably like maybe 90% of the field who we know there are things we're good at, but we rely on others for certain tasks or for certain things that we just can't do. Like, for example, I'll just tell you one of mine. So one of mine is that I'm okay at talking to people and I'm okay at talking in classes. However, just because I'm an extrovert and it's part of my job to share information, that means that when I get with students who really just need to be listened to and need that space, I have such a tendency to want to jump in and be helpful. And this is consistent with a lot of people, right? Is I want to be helpful, I want to provide answers, but sometimes I just need to say, you know what? They just need to talk it out. They don't need answers. They just need to be heard. And if they're heard, they can come up with their own answers. It's very that client-centered perspective. So when it comes to conditional dependency, I look at myself as being kind of in this stage. The people that I know who I highly respect and who have been in the field for many years and, 15, 20, 30 years, whatever, I see them as being autonomous across domains because they understand not only student development, but they understand the political environment, and they've seen lots of different clients, and so they really get a sense for how to work through ethical conflicts. They know the role of a counselor, that kind of stuff. And I consider myself to be in level 3 here, where I'm still working on that. There's still lots of stuff that I need other people's help for. And especially when it comes to my own barriers of like, I just don't know enough about this, or I'm overly stressed out and I need someone else to help me ground in this moment because I'm not able to do it for myself, something like that. So I'm not expecting all of us to be perfect at these things. What I expect us to do, myself included, and this is what I get to help students hopefully try and understand, is that I expect all of us to be able to look within ourselves and say, I know my barriers, I know what I'm working on, I know the things that keep me from being helpful to other people, and that's what I'm focusing on when we talk about autonomy here, not just the ability to complete tasks on time and that kind of stuff. In terms of what that looks like cognitively, it's accepting and is aware of strengths and weaknesses of both self and client. So we get a lot of students who come in and it's not half, but we'll just split them up into 2 groups right now. You get those students who are like, I want to help the clients and it's all about them and I just want to focus on them, and I'm learning about their cultural nuances and I'm learning about diagnoses or like barriers to accommodation processes or something like that. But they're not really focusing on, okay, what am I doing to grow? On the other hand, we have lots of people who are like, I'm not sure if I'm cut out for this. I'm not sure if I can do this. I'm not sure if I really have what it takes to be a counselor. And they don't even really think about the clients. And that's where we get to say, look, well, yeah, okay, I know you're nervous. What do you think about that guy? How do you think he's doing? What's going on in his life? And so depending on the person, we kind of shift focus from one thing to the other. So in terms of level 3, what that person looks like in terms of their self and other awareness, not only have they already grown to understand what their barriers are, but they can also do that with clients as well and kind of do both of those things simultaneously. In terms of their affect and their behavioral performance outwardly, being aware of their own reactions and of their empathy. It's one thing to say, I can empathize, and it's another thing entirely to say, I empathize in this way, but not that way, or I have more empathy for these kind of situations and not those. It's just a deepening understanding of how I react to a client or a situation, something like that. And then also knowing a person's reactions, how their reactions, what they actually are and how they affect other people, that's kind of important too. One of the fun things that I do sometimes with students is I do this more now that it's virtual. It's a little bit easier, but even sometimes in classes, I'll say, okay, hold up a mirror. Usually that means in practicum classes, they can see themselves on screen, and I make sure they turn their window on. And I say, as you're talking with the rest of the class or you're watching your own client videos where you're doing your practice, watch yourself. And they're like, oh, that's uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. I look ugly, or I'm, put on 10 pounds or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but that's the same face that your clients are seeing. And what we want to be able to do is anticipate what kind of reactions we're giving and then use that to sort of make some guesses about how the client might be responding to that. So one of the things I know about myself is that when I get tired and I've had a long semester or I've just been really busy and I'm stressed out, is that I don't smile very much. I'm not as expressive. And so while I might feel completely happy or, settled or whatever, on the outside, I look kind of grumpy. It's like resting grump face. So when I look at myself in the mirror, I'm like, ugh, you're not even smiling. Or actually, it happens in pictures. I'll be like, you're not even smiling. And on the inside, I'm like, oh, but I feel fine. But, the expression that I give to other people may not project that kind of internal feeling. And so having that kind of awareness really becomes important at this stage where people say, like, I know how clients are going to look at me, and I can even say things that might help them understand that. We talk about this in a different context, but it's a very similar process to when someone has a visible disability and they have to justify it to other people because they know how they look on the outside and they know the kind of concerns that people have, and so they can navigate those social relationships in a different way. This is something that counselors do as well, and they're not always ready to be doing that kind of thing because sometimes it comes out as defensiveness, which we know, same thing with disability. It's don't look at me like that. How dare you? Another thing is to say, no, you can look, it's okay, and you can ask questions. That's completely appropriate. Or it's, I'm comfortable with myself. You can look whatever you want, or you look at me however you want to, but I don't need to justify myself to you or explain myself. And there's all these different ways of managing this kind of self-awareness and how other people perceive us. But this is something that we look for, is can a person navigate through that kind of thing in an appropriate way that, in my opinion, maintains relationship with clients and leaves the door open for more engagement. That's the trick to it. And then finally, I'm just going to keep track of time here. Finally, professional identity is established. This is when somebody knows who they are as a counselor, what their special expertise is, what they are good at, what they're not good at, when they need other people to help them with certain things, how to build a team and work together. And this, by the way, goes with clients too. If somebody's just seeing a client, they can say, hey, this is a collaborative process. Here's what I can do. Here's what I need you to do. I know the boundaries. I can express those. I can help you work through them if you have conflicts of like what I should be doing, but I just can't, that kind of stuff. Somebody has that established and they know their role. Not only do they know their role personally, but they also understand the profession as a whole and know that even if they can handle certain things, might those be outside the boundaries of what other people can handle, and also take that responsibility of sort of managing the whole profession in terms of their own personal behavior. That one's a little complicated, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. In another way, it's like saying, I've grown to be able to get myself a job through my teenage years, and I'm now getting married, and I can handle my marriage well, and I have kids, and I can take on those children. And now I know that my responsibility is not just for me to survive and do well, but now I have to care about them. And then at some point, as the kids leave the house, some people have this, but I recognize how I contribute to my community, to my world, to my nation, whatever it is. I contribute to Mother Earth even in a different way that says I'm responsible in my own little way for all of that stuff. And this is what I'm talking about here when it comes to professional identity being established. It's, I know that I'm a representative of not just me, but also my office and my community and my profession as well. So it's an expanded understanding of my place in the stratosphere, for lack of a better term. In all of those areas that we talked about before, when it comes to autonomy, there's this list right here. Skill competence. Does a person have the competence to perform the tasks of counseling? Can they do the assessment, both formal and informal? Can they conceptualize clients in a useful and productive way, et cetera, et cetera? Once a person gets there and they have this sort of across all those domains, they've got that down, then we can consider them autonomous, like fully autonomous. That doesn't mean that people don't still need other people. It just means that they've learned how to work through conflict situations or difficult decisions that have to be made, that kind of stuff, while also understanding how it affects not just them, but their office, their community, their profession, whatever, too. So that's a little bit more about what we mean across domains. This is kind of a repetition of that, but personalized understanding crosses domains and is adjusted with experience and age. So essentially with this last level, we're saying like you've got the whole package. If I were to put a number to this, and I have no reason to believe this is like science or anything, but I would say there are very few, like maybe top 5% of all counselors really get to this place. Maybe there's probably more actually, but the point is that there's not as many people that really understand how to be a steward to their whole profession and their community and their clients all at the same time. Some of us really, especially in academia, this is a thing where people like, they hold a bunch of board seats and they do all this research and they're just not connected with their community and don't really have the ability to connect with clients. And that's sort of a missed opportunity because that's not all of what a counselor is. And so when it comes to the reason that I say it's few of us, it's because some of us specialize so specifically in one thing that we forget the scope of being a steward to the profession and ourselves and our clients all at the same time. So that's kind of why I say that. You can totally disagree with me on that if you want to, but so that's basically it. Just as sort of a summary, the reason that we're doing this kind of thing is because we want to understand student development, not just how you manage people and not just how you supervise them at work, but how you can understand where they're at in their developmental process and what we can be doing as supervisors to help them get to the next stage. That's, I guess, one thing I didn't talk about too much. Maybe I'll spend just a moment talking about that since we're doing okay on time. When you see a student who comes in, remember this middle box here on middle column, on autonomy. At level 1, a student is highly dependent and needs a lot of structure. One of the things I do as a supervisor to help in those situations is if they're saying, this happens all the time. You're the professor. It's your job to write a syllabus and outline what assignments I need to do and when I have to do them, and then I'll do them. But I can't do it unless I understand your expectations. And they get really annoyed with me because one of the things I say on day 1 of practicum is I said, okay, I used to give people syllabi about all the expectations. And I still do that to a certain degree because there are certain requirements they have to satisfy, practice so many hours and have direct client experience, that kind of stuff. But what I say is, now that you have all that clear, I need you to go out and do it. And you need to figure out how to do it. And I want you to also make some decisions about when you come to class, what do you want to talk about? What is the most important thing for you to learn? Are you working on yourself or are you working on understanding clients? And as they sort of take on that responsibility, then they say, oh, I'm working on myself, but I really need to be working more on understanding clients, or vice versa. And so I put a lot more of that responsibility on them to sort of self-regulate and self-manage their practicum experience with the hope that they'll build a little more of that, okay, I can do this. I can take on this responsibility to make sure I get all the things done. It's really annoying for them most of the time. Kind of like I made the analogy to the teenage years in level 2. In level 1, it's sort of like when you have a kid who's like, I need my mom and dad to do my laundry for me. And I'm like, well, actually, I think you're old enough to learn this. So why don't I let you do it? I'm still going to do it most of the time, but I'm going to tell them it's part of their job and then give them incentives and motivation to help them want to do it so they're not freaked out about it all the time. You know what I mean? So there's those kind. On the flip side, there's also those very overconfident people who think they're not dependent, but they need to build in a little bit more dependency. In those situations, one of the things that I choose to do or can be done is to really have some good reality checks and saying, okay, you're taking this, making this decision, but it's a kind of a big risk. Do you really want to be making that? Let's talk about that as a group. And they find out they're kind of alone in their ability to, be confident about what they can do. And they realize they're missing certain perspectives from other students about what they understand about the client or the situation. And oftentimes what that does is sort of deflate their own ego a little bit so they can say, oh, okay, I guess I maybe do need to ask other people's opinions. And maybe I do need to be a little bit more cautious here and not throw caution to the wind just to get out there and be learning new things. So that sort of reality check, I guess, is one of those things that can be done with students in that situation. In terms of level 2, I guess it's helpful for me to think about that teenage analogy because and somebody told me a piece of wisdom that I use with my son. He's only 5 right now, so he's not that old, but they said, my dad always gave me just a little bit more independence and a little bit more responsibility than I could actually handle. And if we use the teenage analogy in driving a car, he's like, I'll give you the keys, but just so you know, if you crash it, you're going to be on the hook for the cost. So drive carefully. And they're like, oh boy, I don't want to have to pay a bunch of money because I only have a part-time job and I can't afford that. So maybe I should consider that extra step. And that's just sort of a parental way of helping a person understand, like, hey, you're kind of on the hook for more than you think. It's not just a free ride with all your friends, that kind of thing. In terms of counseling, what that can mean is, okay, you have this conflict situation. I'm glad you brought it to the group here or to staffing or to me as a supervisor, whatever it is. And you're concerned about what to do. Here are your choices. Now, what do you want to do? What do you think is most important? And they make a choice, and I say, okay, did you consider this other thing too? And they say, oh, no, I didn't consider that, whatever. And it's an anxiety-provoking process, but it also helps them build more of that autonomy because it gives them those extra things to think about. It also keeps them pushing them just a little bit further than they're comfortable with. And so it's, again, I tell this to all my classes too, but I say, this class is probably not going to be the most comfortable. It's probably not going to be the most fun, even though you'll walk away, this is mostly true, you'll mostly walk away with this feeling of something important is going on. I feel like I'm growing and learning, but I can't always pinpoint what it is that I'm getting out of it. Sometimes they can, and we do activities to help them sort of put words to that feeling. But pushing them just a little further beyond their comfort zone is kind of what I go for at this place, to help them understand that responsibility of theirs that will be fully on their shoulders when they get out of school. But this is now an opportunity to feel a little bit of that and not be overwhelmed and not feel unsupported, something like that. This is really one of those places where if somebody is under assertive and they're expecting to be compliant with certain kind of rules and regulations and laws and all that kind of stuff, that's when I say, okay, why was that law written that way? What's the spirit of the law that we need to be considering? When we talk about an ethical code, let's look at the words and let's try and understand the intent of what is really going on here. Classic example is no gift giving. You can't accept gifts, or no gift receiving. You can't accept gifts from clients. But if a client comes in and says, hey, I found this flower outside and I picked it and I just wanted to give it to you because I think it's pretty and I really want you to have it. And you're like, oh, well, I can't accept gifts. That doesn't seem to be what the spirit of the ethical code is all about, right? So helping clients understand, like, what are those gray areas in the codes and in the laws and that kind of stuff, and how do you navigate through those? On the flip side, people who are over assertive, I say, but this law says you can't do that. Like, if they're like, oh, I'll accept gifts, all kinds of them, I don't even care. And I'm like, okay, but what would be the consequences of accepting this gift? And is this really meeting the spirit of the code or the law or something like that? And so it's just really sort of a lot of playing devil's advocate, frankly, and pushing people outside of their comfort zone or making them uncomfortable by helping them understand that they're getting into territory that they're probably not ready to handle, and then showing them how they're not ready to handle it. So there's that. In terms of level 3, this is where, when I say that like 80% of us are all in this place, I don't do a whole lot of playing devil's advocate at this point. I don't tell students what they should be thinking about and what they should be working on. I really say, okay, if you understand where you're at, what your personal barriers are, then I'm going to ask you to come to me and tell me what you want. What kind of feedback would be the most helpful? Do you want me to give you solutions, or do you want me just to be a listening ear and give you comfort? Do you want me to provide you with alternatives and play devil's advocate if that's helpful? Or do you want me just to kind of sit back and let you just talk it out within yourself? By this point, hopefully people would know that. They would know, like, this is what I need from you and here's how you can help me. And I say, okay, if I can do that, then I will. Great. But I don't tell people how to work and how to live and how to do their lives. That means that it's not just students. That means with my colleagues, with my bosses at the university, with other people in the profession. I don't think that at level 3, if people have developed and made progress to this area, then they don't need that direction, because they can be sort of self-guided and they know who and when to reach out for help if they need it. And so I let people have that responsibility to do that instead of kind of overburdening them with my opinions about how things work and what people should be doing. So at this point, I don't really provide a whole lot of, like, you need to be doing this and you need to watch out and you need to be careful and you need to be considering these other things or whatever. I say, where do you want to be? What do you want to learn? How can you know my skill set, you know what I can provide. Now, how can you use that to make yourself better? So that's kind of how at least I handle that level 3 stuff. And then in terms of the last one, at that point, level 3I or 4, whatever we want to call it, at that point, people really know, hopefully they know themselves and they're willing to accept feedback and they know what they're looking for. And at this point, I really just get to share more about myself and say, like, well, here's what I can maybe do. Here's how I can help. Tell me if you need something from me. Otherwise, we're just going to hang out and enjoy life together. We're just going to try and laugh a little bit. We can strategize about how we, where the field needs to be and where it's going and all this kind of stuff. but we both get to manage our workload and how much we can handle, and we both can trust each other to follow through with things if we engage in a project or something like that. That's both students, you guys as colleagues, my bosses, whatever. But it's a really adult conversation about what can I handle, what are you expecting of me, how is this going to contribute to the wider scope of where we're going as a university or a profession or something like that. So hopefully that little breakdown of like, what do you actually do and how can you facilitate this can help. One of the things that I kind of alluded to earlier, and I said I would mention again that I haven't yet, is when it comes to motivation, understanding where a person is in terms of their stage of change can be really helpful and instructive to helping get somebody to the next place. Are they contemplating it? Or let's start at the beginning. Are they pre-contemplation? They don't even know what they're looking for. That's the case often in level 1, sometimes level 2, not quite as much in level 3. As they progress through the levels, they think, okay, but now I'm understanding what I need to be doing, but I'm not really sure what to do about it. That's kind of like level 1, level 2. And then there's, yeah, I'm kind of making a plan for how I'm going to, I don't know, go on a diet or exercise more or become a better counselor or work my way up in my career, whatever. Like there's an actual tangible plan to making it happen. And then level 4 stage of change is, are they actually doing it? Are they actually following through? And so by level 4, they're kind of down in this 2 to 3 area where they're like, I know what I'm working on. I just got to spend the time and put in the work to get to that place that I want to get to overcome that barrier, to handle whatever insecurities I might have or something like that. So in my mind, at least, that motivational interviewing stages of change kind of talk can really be helpful in terms of kind of assessing which level a student is at and what I can then be doing to help them get there. A student might be contemplating like, do I actually need this amount of structure? Do I actually need my supervisor up here in level 1? But by the time they get to level 2, they might say, okay, I don't need my supervisor, but I'm still not really sure how I'm supposed to, like, as an example here, focus on a client, or I'm still not really sure like how much I should be empathizing with this person versus is there reason to distrust them, that kind of thing. So those stages can change depending on what IDM level of stage they're at, but nevertheless, it can be helpful to think in those terms. So I think that's pretty much all I have for you. Hopefully this has been helpful and instructive, and if so, I'd love your feedback. If you don't want to give feedback, that's fine. I'll do this until people stop watching or stop paying attention. But it was, even though I don't get to see you guys out there, and I don't know who is watching this video, and I don't know where you're sitting, whether it's your desk at home or at your office, or what the context is for your workplace, my hope is that I can provide at least 1 or 2 things that are useful for you in terms of like actually applying this to your work and actually helping you see a student coming out of a program like ours in a different way, so that you can help them get to that next stage wherever they're at, or maybe even for yourself take a little bit into. I know that when I was a student and I learned about this stuff, I was like, oh, I'm totally not at level 3. I'm at level 2. I thought I was actually doing okay, but I'm nowhere near that. So that really helped me gain some perspective. And if you're in that boat too, that seems like a good place to be. Okay, I'll leave it there, and I will talk to you sometime, hopefully in the future, if our paths cross. Bye-bye.